It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. With me today, Conservative MP Andrew Bowie, Labour peer Ray Collins, Tribune Magazine's Grace Blakely and the non-affiliated peer Claire Fox. Today, Boris Johnson's ethics advisor quits.
To lose one ethics advisor was really an embarrassment, but to lose two in 2 years...
This has been a difficult time over Partygate. I think there is a genuine case for moving on.
He says he was placed in an impossible and odious position. We'll bring you the details.
The Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Did Keir Starmer manage to shake off claims he lacks excitement?
He thinks he's Obi-Wan Kenobi. The truth is he's Jabba the Hutt.
Yesterday, Priti Patel said this.
Evil people treat human beings as cargo.
We'll discuss whether the word evil is helpful in politics.
The climate in the UK is undergoing undeniable warming. Heatwaves are now 30 times more likely to occur than they were in 1750.
And with the sun out across parts of the country, do we need to change how we think about hot weather? So, in a dramatic development, the Prime Minister's ethics advisor on the ministerial code, amongst other things, has quit. He was actually in front of MPs earlier in the week about his position, but we now have the details for his resignation in a letter, exchange of letters between him and the Prime Minister. We've just taken this part of Lord Geit's letter to Boris Johnson. I was tasked to offer a view about the government's intention to consider measures which risk a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code. This request has placed me in an impossible and odious position. This was the response, or at least part of it, from Boris Johnson. You say that you were put in an impossible position regarding my seeking your advice on potential future decisions relating to the Trade Remedies Authority. My intention was to seek your advice on the national interest in protecting a crucial industry. I should say we've been waiting for the exchange of letters all morning, and finally Number 10 did actually publish them. We've only had minutes to look at the contents, but let's discuss them with the BBC's Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young. What does all this mean exactly?
I mean, it is a bit opaque, isn't it? It's not as clear-cut as we might have expected. There have been other issues that Lord Geit has talked about, and actually in his letter he also does suggest that he came close to resigning previously. You remember he's already looked into the flat refurbishment and how that was all paid for. That was one issue. And then, of course, around Partygate, very critical of the Prime Minister because he didn't talk about the ministerial code and didn't really confront whether he had broken the ministerial code. This is a bit more opaque. We think it's about steel tariffs. It's not entirely clear, but we think that's what the case may be. And you can tell from the tone of the Prime Minister's response that he doesn't quite understand what's gone wrong here, that he says he was simply asking for his opinion about all of this and was doing what he should do, which is to say, right, you're the advisor, what do you think about all of this? So we don't really know why Lord Geit didn't just give a ruling on it. Some might think that it's because he's thought in the past the Prime Minister has ignored his advice, and he obviously suggests in his letter, doesn't he, that this would be a deliberate breach of the ministerial code. So he's obviously somehow got the impression that the Prime Minister was going to go ahead with this anyway. So not entirely clear cut, but it's the end of a pretty sorry saga, I think. I spoke to one of Lord Geit's friends earlier and they said to me, look, we're just incredibly saddened that someone who is an honourable man, who is a dedicated public servant, has been put in this position where he's been forced to resign by the behaviour of a Prime Minister.
Vicky Young, thank you very much, and do come back if you have any further developments or reaction to the letter being published. You've read it, it's there in front of you. All of our guests actually have had a chance to look at both letters. What's your reaction? Because you, Andrew, are one of the 148 who didn't have confidence in the Prime Minister when that vote took place.
Yeah, this is obviously quite a difficult letter to read and digest. As Vicky says, it is quite opaque. The Prime Minister refers to this decision related to the Trade Remedies Authority and him seeking Lord Guy's advice. Lord Guy is an incredibly able public servant who's given years of service to this country in various guises, and it is very sad to see him feel that he has to resign today. But as I say, we don't actually know the specific reasons why Lord Guy felt today he had to resign. Maybe more details will come out in due course. Right now, though, as I said, it is quite a difficult letter to read.
All right, I'll come back to you in just a moment. What about your response?
Well, I don't think it's opaque at all. I think what he clearly has said, that over a long period of time, he's found it really difficult, because I think even Dominic Raab said this morning, when it was quoted about the Prime Minister continually being in scope of the ministerial code. And what I think Lord Guy meant was that he was constantly coming across issues that were potential breaches of the code, and that was a clear problem. And I think actually the telling point in the letter, I think why he's resigned now, is not so much about the individual case, whether it's British Steel or trade or WTO rules, but he says to suspend the provisions of the code to suit a political end. This would make a mockery not only of the respect for the code, but license the suspension of its provisions in governing the conduct of Her Majesty's ministers. So that's an ongoing situation that clearly he wasn't prepared to tolerate.
Andrew?
Yeah, look, I don't disagree. Obviously, Lord Guy has found the last few months incredibly difficult, and there are various reasons that he's given in this letter for feeling the way he does, not least the increasingly public role of what should be very much behind-the-scenes position. But as I say, on the specific reasoning of why he felt he had to resign today, we still don't know the full detail. Perhaps in the next few hours and days we'll find out more and be able to take a considered opinion on the developments today.
We did, of course, ask to speak to a minister, interview a minister on the programme today, but no one was available. Your reaction to the letters?
Well, I mean, I think this government having an ethics advisor is a bit like a brewery having a sobriety advisor. It's a little bit pointless. And it's not just about the Partygate scandal. We've also had the scandal with Boris Johnson's wallpaper. We've had the Greensill scandal, which is in some ways related to this because we had all that information around money being channeled from the government via various different banks into Greensill, which was lending to British Steel. And the collapse of Greensill was then linked to all these problems that we've been having with steel. So these scandals are kind of circulating around and around and around. Boris Johnson apparently thinks that he's able to just tumble through and consistently, get through them. And so far, he's been correct. But I think there's an even bigger issue here when it comes to ethics in this government, which is actually its policies. We've just seen several people who are about to be deported to Rwanda. Basically, one man saying that he felt as if he was about to be taken to be executed. Priti Patel there saying that only evil people treat human beings like cargo. That is what this government is doing.
All right. Well, there are two things, Claire, because this is the second advisor to quit within 2 years. Alex Allen did, ironically, over Priti Patel and a report about bullying claims overruled by the Prime Minister. There is a sense, from what we've already heard, of being tipped over the edge, the sort of final straw for Lord Guyte, because he says in his letter that although he was satisfied to some extent with the Prime Minister's explanation over Partygate receiving a fixed penalty notice, he only stayed as independent advisor by a very small margin.
So I think the danger with this, let's think about how it's kind of perceived by the public, because this conversation here feels like I'm in a HR discussion. You know what I mean? It's like sort of box ticking. I thought that when Grace was talking about the policies, I do think the public want to discuss the policies. I would disagree that for example, the Rwanda issue actually is evil or what have you. I think there's an argument to be had about that. I'm not trying to change the subject. But the reason I'm saying it...
Because we're going to talk about that in a moment. But if we come back to the reason... Yes.
No, but what I'm saying is you read a scathing letter... We're trying to work out whether it's about... I'm fascinated. Steel tariffs. I'm thinking, oh, I didn't know that because I couldn't tell from the letter. It's very much in-house, internal. And with the reason I'm mentioning this is because it's whether this cuts through or not. Because we've been in a situation where internally the Conservative MPs have no confidence in the Prime Minister. We now have this. It's more embarrassment. I am not... You know, it's nothing shocking, is it? I'm hardly like...
I think it's seriously shocking.
No, but what I mean is... Yes, but I'm not shocked by the fact that Boris Johnson is not fitting in with the ethics
why is it shocking?
Well, because I think what Claire's trying to do is sort of, you know... put it into a sort of individual context. Actually,
I'm trying to put it in a political context,
well,
to be fair.
Let me take it in the political context, because I think what this episode illustrates is how damaging it is to our political process. It's damaging to the Conservative Party. It's more importantly damaging to our country. And I think the public know that too. Well, that's why their trust in their Prime Minister has been so diminished.
But it's also the case, and this I suppose what I'm concerned about, is that the process of keeping the Prime Minister, he's won the no-confidence vote. What I don't want is this to be the distraction from the big issues. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's not because I think the Prime Minister...
Exactly what the government would like, I think, for us to respond to.
I do not want to... The idea that what we spend all our time is saying, is Boris Johnson an ethically good man? I think that ship has sailed a long time ago.
The issue that most people are concerned with. The issue that people are concerned with is whether or not they can trust politicians, and at the moment they feel as though they can't.
Let's bring it back. But let's bring it back to Boris Johnson, because Claire raises an interesting point. I mean, the confidence vote failed to get rid of Boris Johnson, or at least have a leadership contest or unseat him, which was obviously the aim. And it is still the case that it will be Tory MPs who will have to do that. Does this shorten Boris Johnson's career?
I mean, I don't know. As I said, this letter only came out this morning. We still don't know the specifics relating to exactly why Lord Geidt resigned.
So another ethics advisor's resigned.
I expressed my opinion last Monday. I voted no confidence in the Prime Minister, but I do agree with Claire. You know, people out there do not want to see the government, the Tory party, navel-gazing and focusing on internal wrangles within our organisation. They don't want us just focused on the Westminster bubble. They do want us talking about the big issues that are facing.
This isn't about the Westminster bubble. This is literally about whether or not people feel that this government has legitimacy, whether they feel that it is accountable to people. And we've had consistently, actually, over the last several years, you know, whether it was because of all of these scandals, whether it's because of, you know, people just generally feeling that politicians aren't paying attention to their interests and their needs. Given that we're in the midst of a deep, deep economic crisis, people need to feel that they can hold politicians to account. And if they do something wrong, they will actually have to pay for that. And that is not what's happening right now.
One of the most damaging periods, I believe, in our politics of the last few years was the year or so that we spent solely talking about Brexit and how we delivered one of the two deals that were delivered by one of the two Prime Ministers. If we were to spend the next 6 months to a year doing exactly the same over the fate of this Prime Minister, I think it would be hugely damaging to the country.
But that is in the hands of the Conservative Party.
Well, I expressed my opinion last week.
Hang on, Ray, and then I'll come to you, Claire.
Well, I do think it's fundamentally about trust. And it's not just about Westminster, and it's not even just about our electorate, vital that is. It's about the reputation of this government, not only in the UK, but also globally.
But what changes now as a result of this resignation? What is the actual outcome?
Well, I think the outcome, it's actually the Prime Minister's own advisor is saying, I can't trust you for the future. He's not saying you did something wrong in the past. He's saying, I can't trust you for the future. Now, the Conservative MPs, all of them, have to read this letter and think seriously about that. It is their responsibility, and I hope they take it seriously and do it soon.
Just before I come to you then, Claire, on that issue, do you think more of your colleagues will join you? I know we can talk about the process stuff, but will more of your colleagues be minded to do what you did last week?
Well, there is no facility for them to do that.
No, but will they be minded to do it? Will this persuade any more onto you?
The rules state that it's a year until he is in the position where he might have to face another confidence vote. I think it'd be very damaging if over the next weeks, months and year we just spent our entire time arguing about whether or not it was the right or wrong decision to take what we did last week, to focus on the issues that I think people are really caring about out there, whilst also being mindful of this entire situation.
Well, I don't think Dominic Raab is going to be willing or capable to go on the Today programme tomorrow and do what he did this morning. He couldn't defend the Prime Minister, and I don't think he will be able to do it tomorrow.
So David Davis, Claire, has said in the past, former Brexit minister, former leadership contender, has said it will be for Boris Johnson death by 1,000 cuts. So is that what we're...
Of course this is another cut. I mean, I think he's fatally wounded. I think I said that the last time. That doesn't... But this is my concern. I agree with Grace that there's a complete problem of trust in all politicians. I think it's all politicians of all parties, and that's why people feel politically homeless, and it's why the Conservative Party got an 80-seat majority, because people felt that their trust was breached in relation to Brexit, which is why so many Labour Party voters voted extraordinarily after generations for the Conservative Party. I think there's a crisis of trust in politicians. That's true. What I'm suggesting is that these letters are not going to be the final point, right? I mean, Partygate has been very damaging. We all know that. But also, as it happens, so were lockdown policies. So were the fact that people couldn't work by all parties.
What is, I think, going to be the final point here is whether or not this government can actually respond to this incredibly deep crisis where people cannot heat their homes.
I know, but
we are arguing about this right now, and there will be people up and down this country who are thinking about how they're going to feed their kids tonight.
Exactly. Well, and they'll be looking at this letter and thinking, I don't understand why they're spending all their time talking about that. And the reason I'm saying that is because you can lose trust in the political process if people become obsessive about what I'm saying. And it's not that I don't understand the importance of an ethics advisor resigning. I'm saying we have to have a sense of proportion. And for me,
people have to be able to put trust in the people that are leading them, and trust requires accountability.
I know.
To trust someone, you have to know that if they do something wrong, they'll step down. And this government has made a mockery of that idea.
You also have to trust the electorate to be able to say that sometimes they think, get on with the job of running the country because we've not got another year with them as leader, and not get caught up in this kind of letter.
All right, well, we're not going to get caught up in it any longer. We're going to talk about Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party. Did you say shame? You can talk about Keir Starmer instead. Yesterday, we were discussing Keir Starmer's performance at Prime Minister's Questions. It was a lively, upbeat performance, and he also attempted to inject some humour, probably to dispel some of the claims that he's been boring. Let's have a look.
Mr. Speaker, as for his boasting about the economy, he thinks he can perform Jedi mind tricks on the country. These aren't the droids you're looking for. No rules were broken. The economy is booming. The problem is the Force just isn't with him anymore. He thinks he's Obi-Wan Kenobi. The truth is he's Jabba the Hutt. He says the economy is booming when it's shrinking. He's game playing so much. He thinks he's on Love Island. Trouble is, Prime Minister, I'm reliably informed that contestants that give the public the ick get booted out.
Well, there you go. They always say PMQs has a certain amount of theatre. Let's have a look at the headline in The Guardian. Tortured Star Wars gags failed to free Starmer from boredom paradox. Did Keir Starmer prove he isn't boring?
Well, clearly not. I have to say the Star Wars jokes were a bit much. I quite like the Love Island one, I'll give him that. But this is part of a broader issue, right? People aren't saying Keir Starmer is boring because he's not doing enough jokes at PMQs. They're saying he's boring because he hasn't come out to the electorate and really showed this is what I stand for. He's not done as good a job as we would have liked, I think, in opposing this government, which has done enough almost to destroy itself without any of his help. And he hasn't, I don't think, come out with a very convincing alternative economic agenda for this country at a time of a very, very deep political crisis, at the same time as not opposing this government's policy on Rwanda. So that's the problem. It's not that he's not funny enough, although that might be an added extra issue.
Right. What did you think of the performance and answering critics?
I think the performance was really good, and I'm very proud of Keir Starmer and what he's been able to achieve, bearing in mind we had the worst general election result at the last election. that we'd experienced in our history. And what he has done has been consistently to rebuild trust and confidence with the electorate. That's what he's been focused on. He is rebuilding trust in a way that I think other politicians should follow.
The electorate don't seem to agree, given we had this poll the other day where people thought that Boris was going to be a better Prime Minister than he was.
Hang on a minute. I mean, if you'd have said to me 2 years, at the end of the last general election, that Labour would be 10 points ahead and that we'd be consistently ahead in the polls.
Well, hang on, 10 points ahead in red wall seats.
Well, anyway.
That was his promise. That's what people were saying however many years ago. If there was any other leader, we would be 20 points ahead. And here we are with another leader who actually hasn't learned from the fact that there are policies that were popular, even though the Brexit issue
can I just say to you, we've now got a leader who's determined to listen to the electorate, a point that Claire keeps making. Unlike the previous general election.
Well, if he was listening to the electorate, he would be following what the electorate want in terms of policy, which is action on climate, action on the economy.
On listening. I thought performance was a good word, and the danger here is that politics becomes performative. I mean, my problem with the mentioning of Love Island was it might be funny or it might not be funny. It felt like a kind of I'm going on Britain's Got Talent and I'm going to say the words Love Island so young people know what I'm talking about. I mean, it was like sort of...
Well, that's Grace. Grace likes it.
No, I know.
I'm 29 next week, so...
But in that sense, my problem with Keir Starmer is actually the lack of policies, the lack of ideological commitment. I'm not clear what the ideological commitment is to. I do not think they represent labouring people of this country. I think they've lost their roots, and I think that Keir Starmer is technocratic in his outlook. But as it happens, the political parties themselves have become kind of empty vessels of ideology. And listening to the electorate, the problem with that is that I want them to have something to say to the electorate.
Well, I think that's what will happen.
No, but I'm saying, but you know what I mean, don't you? What you need is you need to go out and say, this is what we stand for, be passionate about it, win over the electorate. That's what politics always was. Now it's a bit like, I mean, this did feel like there'd been a group that said, they're saying he's boring, can we liven him up? Here are the jokes. And people get cynical. When we talk about lack of trust, the public can look at that and say, oh, for God's sake, that's not what we meant.
I mean, the problem with this discussion is we don't know who's saying these things. I mean, we all have to make our own...
Angela Rayner said it.
Well, Angela Rayner did not say that.
Well, she said to me, actually, or us, I should say, on BBC Newscast, that, yes, sometimes I think he could put a bit more welly into it.
Well, I think that's because his job is to try and rebuild our party. And I think he's done a remarkable job in a short period of time. We're now in a position where we can actually go to the next general election with the expectation of winning it.
Right.
And that's, I think, really important.
Well, hang on, just to say on that, I mean, let's say he is, I'm not saying he is, but let's say he is sort of a little straighter, straight-laced, a little bit more dull, if you like. But actually, that might come as a relief to the electorate, Andrew Bowie. And at least it would mean that it wasn't Boris Johnson and his performance.
Well, then he should stick to being the dull, straight-laced politician. I mean, the problem that Labour have isn't that Keir Starmer... I mean, I feel I should apologise to my dad, because for many, many years now, I've thought he's told the worst jokes I've ever heard. But yesterday, I'm afraid, Keir Starmer certainly trumped that. Keir Starmer has managed to do what, in the last 2 weeks, something that a Conservative leader hasn't been able to do this year, and that's unite the entire Conservative Party. His performances at PMQs the last 2 weeks have been bafflingly bad, incredibly weak. He's missed so many open goals, and we, last week, were in a position where 2 days previously, 148 MPs had voted no confidence in our leader.
What you've just said is simply not credible, because half of your MPs had voted, including yourself, voted no confidence in the leader. Claire says that the electorate, she thinks, are discounting the fact that he's incapable of telling the truth.
Right.
I think that's really important. And actually, we've got in Keir Starmer a man of integrity, a determination to put the interests of this...
But that's not enough when people can't afford to heat their homes.
It's a low bar.
It's not
all right,
enough
guys,
when we're
if you all talk
process.
over each other, one at a time, you're saying it's about heat, it's not enough.
I'm literally saying that there are going to be people who are watching this show who are looking at Westminster saying, are you going to solve these issues? Are you going to solve the fact that I can't heat my home, I can't feed my kids, and there's just this, Star Wars jokes and silly bickering? Come out with some policies.
But I think,
tell people how you're going to make their lives better.
I think we are.
I think the danger that you've got is that it's a low bar if you're saying he's a man of integrity versus Boris Johnson. I mean, this is not exactly hard work, right? If that's all you've got, we're not him. Right, we're dull, and I mean, I thought it was interesting. You know, maybe everyone needs a calming period after Boris, and we'll get the dull man in. That's not an inspiring vision. No. And you keep saying the cost of living crisis. I think there are more ethically horribly difficult questions for Labour, such as controlling borders and immigration. Now,
why is that a difficult question? Why is that a difficult question?
Hang on, Ray's posed that. Why is it a difficult question for Labour?
It's a difficult question for Labour because I haven't heard a clear policy solution on controlling the borders and immigration questions. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because...
Well, what we don't want is gimmicks. What we want is proper policy.
Hang on. So we've raised the spectre of a lack of policies and put that to Ray. What is Labour's answer on immigration? Because Jess Elgott in The Guardian said Starmer's spokesman yesterday declined to say whether Labour would cancel the Rwanda policy if in government, though deeply critical of the policy's cost and efficiency, but declines to clarify if Starmer believes it's morally wrong. Is that what...
It's unethical. I mean, well, if you listen to our Home Secretary, she made it absolutely clear this is a gimmick policy that is incredibly costly, is ineffective and unethical.
But I know what's wrong with this. I want to know how you control the borders.
This is not all ganging up on Ray here. Let him
and therefore, actually, you know, the plan... I mean, what this government has failed to do is, you know, Dominic Raab on the radio this morning focused on the criminal gangs that are exploiting, you know, very vulnerable people. What is this government doing with the French authorities to actually ensure that those criminal gangs are... I mean, Priti Patel can't even attend a meeting in France. Our diplomatic relationships are...
She was prevented from attending.
Why was she prevented?
The idea... Hang on. Let's hear Grace, because Grace, what would your policy solution be for Labour? What should they be saying?
What they should be saying is that this is morally and ethically wrong. The people of this country are good people. They see unethical behaviour when they see it. And when you have a man saying, I felt as if I was being taken to my death when I was being boarded onto this plane, and this is not the first time something like this has happened, when we've seen outsourcing companies kill a man effectively, with Jemmy Mbenga, where you know, those outsourcing companies basically were responsible for his death, and that was, you know, a horrendous issue. Everyone looking at that happening is going to look at that and think that is unethical. The fact that we don't have anyone in our politics coming out and saying that is astonishing.
But I don't think... I mean, if you listen to Yvette Cooper over the weekend and certainly today, she's setting out very clear steps that this government could take to ensure that we address this issue. And one of the things is, how do we work with our allies? How do we work with France to ensure that those people are not exploited?
Right, but Claire,
how do we address the issue of the, you know, the delay that sort of refugees face in terms of their, you know, getting their status confirmed? A year. It's absolutely outrageous. This is a government of maladministration.
Right, but what about Labour's solution and being... whose side are they on?
I think that the problem the people I was trying to refer to, which is why I think it's ethically difficult, by the way, is that there is obviously a demand to stop freedom of movement and great concern about people arriving in the boats, and a lot of people believing that they aren't legitimate refugees and that there's a lot of economic migration. I'm not arguing that. I'm saying that's what a lot of people think, right? If the only answer is to condemn the Rwanda scheme as unethical and so on... Grace, I'm just saying, if that's the only answer you've got, it looks as though you're flying in the face of it. So what I'm suggesting to Labour, I'm suggesting to Labour that if you're going to address that, it has to be very clear. I'm not telling you what your policy should be. It has to be very, very clear. Are you saying there should be no freedom of movement? We've got to clamp down on illegal immigration. We're not going to accept...
There is no freedom of movement. We've had Brexit.
No, I know, but there is obviously a situation where control of borders obviously is flown in the face.
I'm going to let Ray have the final word, and then we've got to move on.
You're trying to fight the issue on you know... Brexit has happened. There is no freedom of movement.
But people are coming into the country over the borders that you're meant to have control of.
And we don't have enough nurses in the NHS.
I know,
we don't have enough workers throughout the country.
I'm going to have to intervene here. Just say don't talk over each other all the time because people can't hear anything. And I'm going to have to end it anyway, I'm afraid, Andrew. Right, we're going to move on to something slightly different, which is that this week the Pope refused to see the war in Ukraine through a lens of good and evil. In an interview with Italian newspaper La Stampa on Tuesday, Pope Francis was asked if he was supportive of Russian President Vladimir Putin, saying, "No, I'm not. I'm simply against reducing complexity to the distinction between good and evil without thinking about the roots and interests, which are very complex." I'm also going to read you something from the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. This is about what we have been talking about, which is their Rwanda asylum policy. Here it is. "We won't be deterred from delivering on our plans to do the right thing and deliver a fairer system. We won't stand idly by while evil gangs put lives at risk." The government's Rwanda asylum policy has been criticised by some as evil too. In the aftermath of the recent Texas school shooting, evil became the operative word of the pro-gun right, with Trump saying at the NRA conference that the existence of evil is one of the very best reasons to arm law-abiding citizens. How useful is the concept of evil in politics, Andrew?
Look, I mean, I would be more concerned if the leader of the world's largest church wasn't thinking deeply about the ethical questions of today, and he's very much entitled to his opinion. But there is evil in this world. The people that opened fire on those innocent school children were evil. The gangs that are making a profit out of human misery by putting them on small boats, sailing them across the Channel, and indeed the ones doing the same in the Mediterranean, are in fact evil. And I'm afraid that when we see evil in this world, we need to call it out and call it for what it is.
Grace?
Well,
sorry, Brent.
Well, can I just say
yes.
that I, you know, using the term evil is an emotional response, and we all do it. I've done it, and particularly in relation to the invasion of Ukraine. But I think it's important. I think the Pope's got a good point, actually, that, you know, we shouldn't sort of blindly use words that have all kinds of broader meanings. And I think, actually, in politics, we need to be a bit more calmer and a little bit more considerate. And certainly, even in the context of Ukraine, President Zelensky has said himself, this war will come to an end when he sits round a table with the Russians. And I think that's what we've got to have in our minds all the time when we're using language. So I think there are times when there's an emotional response, and we all do it.
I think
but we should try and avoid doing it.
I think the problem with having a good versus evil narrative is that it lets people off the hook. If you say you've behaved unethically, it implies that you had the capacity to behave differently. If you said you're an evil person, it really does polarise politics into these two different camps, and it's very good for politicians. Vladimir Putin loves this idea that he is fighting a war of good versus evil, that Ukraine is full of Nazis and he's going to go out and exterminate them. Equally, you know, Priti Patel likes the idea that she is the good guy fighting the evil guys to protect us, to protect citizens. When you are able to use this language to make people scared, that is a gift to people whose politics is based on fear rather than on hope and optimism and solidarity.
Claire?
I actually, and to turn the ratchet on that, I've actually been shocked in the way that people have described the Conservatives and the Tory party as evil as a way of dismissing them. This is not because, and I know that, you know, as I speak, you know, on social media, people said, you know, Tory apologist brought in the House of Lords by Boris, I know what she's up to. But actually, I just find the whole thing unhelpful, right? Because I really agree with what your point, which is we're in a situation whereby labelling people as evil or in these kind of very extreme ways delegitimises them so you don't have to engage with them or the ideas they represent. And so I want to have maybe it's because I'm the director of the Academy of Ideas, maybe it's because I did BBC's Moral Maze for 20 years, or whatever it is. But I always think, isn't it a bit more complicated than that? Now, that does not mean fudging in the middle. I am completely on Ukraine's side. I don't think there's any excuse for what Russia has done in terms of the invasion of a sovereign state and all the rest of it. But just to kind of go, they're evil and I'm on the side of good, means that you never have to think about the difficulties of NATO's historically, the roots of that conflict and all the rest of it. So I want more nuance, and I want us to stop labelling people in a way that effectively means that you don't really take them seriously or take the issue seriously.
Also, but there's no excuse for not calling out, for example, clear breaches of the UN Charter, clear breaches of international law,
It's not about
and
hiding.
potentially, you know, war crimes that have been committed.
No, I agree. But what I'm saying is, you know, the way things like the words like deniers are used. You know, people are accused of phobia and bigotry, but it's kind of an elastic concept, so that you basically end up with everyone's a racist or everyone's phobic this or whatever, Islamophobic or whatever. In other words, it loses its effect.
Behaviour without calling people evil.
But
you don't have to just, you know...
No, that's right.
You don't have to say, I don't have any values and I'm not going to defend them.
I've called people evil. I'm observing something, but I also think...
It's an emotional response.
But we also lose the punch behind it, don't we? Because if everybody's a racist,
I think there's definitely a wider debate to be had, especially within this country and indeed across the West, in terms of taking the heat out of some of the language in our political debate right now. And I think on today, which is, I believe, the 6th anniversary of the death of Jo Cox, it's more important than ever that we start looking at the language that we, as people in the public sphere, use, and those people who engage with us on social media, through email, or also in public debate. We've lost 2 members of Parliament in the past few years. So I think it's incredibly important that we look at the language that we are using, how we influence the language that people use.
I mean, actually, if we're talking about Jo Cox here, then we need to talk about the way in which we're legitimising, often in our political debate, very unethical ideas while refusing to call them out as unethical. We don't have to call everyone who's on the far right evil to say that those far right ideologies are poisoning our politics.
In political debate.
I don't, because one of the dangers of where you're going is that we've heard this, that people start trying to either turn political debate into the most anodyne, consensual, sit round singing Kumbaya. I mean, I'm not suggesting that.
I'm from Scotland, so that's never going to happen.
But I also think it can lead to censorship, because people then start saying, oh, well, we've got to watch our language, because otherwise it will lead to the killing.
On the language issue, what about, you've all mentioned or touched on this issue about it delegitimising discussion. Does it also mean you can't find solutions?
But that's the point I was going to make.
That person is evil, there's nothing we can do to sort it out.
I'm not a religious person, but I hear what the Pope's saying, and I also think he's thinking about the process of negotiation, the peace process. And, you know, even in our country, we've seen peace processes taking a long time, difficult things to address, but we've achieved them. And that's achieved by actually sort of respecting other people's positions, but trying to move forward. And ultimately, you know, I hope a peace will occur in Ukraine, and President Zelensky will be able to negotiate a settlement that will be will meet the needs of the Ukrainian people to live in security and prosperity and neighbourliness with all their neighbours.
Right.
That's what I want to say.
I just want to show this tweet. This is from Grace here, because this was in response to a GOP gun rights activist, Lauren Bobart, who tweeted on the day of the Uvalde shooting in Texas, "You can't legislate away evil." And you posed the question, so America is a uniquely evil country?
America has more shootings per capita than any other country in the world by a very, very long margin. The idea on the American right that this is because of evil people, or even the idea that it's because, you know, there is a mental health crisis, which there is, but that crisis is happening all across the world, is farcical. It's because they haven't outlawed guns.
Right, but on this word evil here, rather than, because we haven't got time for a whole discussion on gun control, that's my fault, I shouldn't have set that hair running, but in terms of the word evil being used there, that you can't legislate it away, is what that activist was saying.
Yeah, well, I struggle because the act of opening fire on innocent young school children was an act of evil. And that's clear, and simple. And that needs to be called out for what it is. Does that mean that we can't have a wider debate about the mental health situation regarding the individual that did that, or the ethics regarding gun control? Of course it doesn't. But that act was an act of evil, and that's quite
And I don't
clear.
disagree, but my point is that it's an excuse for politicians who can basically say, those guys over there are all bad, I'll protect you against them, so put all your faith in me and don't ask any questions.
Well, and ultimately, it comes back to what the Pope, I think, was trying to say, is that if we are politicians that try and find solutions for our people, then we can't simply polarise things. I accept that.
All right. Well, I've always wanted to say this towards the end of the show. It's time to talk about the weather. Let's have a look here in the Daily Mirror, because summer is definitely here. Here we glow. Brits to sizzle as we reach 34 centigrade, hotter than Croatia and Spain. Taking a slightly different stance, here's the warning from the government's Health Security Agency. Hot weather update. The UK HSA and Met Office have issued a level 3 heat health alert for London, east of England and the south east. Well, we did see the mercury rise to just over 28 degrees in some parts of the UK yesterday, the hottest day of the year so far. But is it something we should be celebrating and embracing? Here's our weather correspondent Chris Fawkes to explain what we can expect. Chris, hello to you. How hot is it going to be over the coming days?
Well, hotter than we've seen so far this year, I suppose, is the brief answer. This area of high pressure is just moving eastwards, and as it does so, we're starting to draw up some very hot air from Europe, where we've seen temperatures over many days into the 40s in Spain, now into the mid to high 30s in parts of France. This afternoon across the UK, probably about 29 degrees Celsius, the top temperature towards the southeast. But it gets hotter than that on Friday across parts of England and Wales as we draw up these winds from the near continent. Whereas for Scotland and Northern Ireland, the winds are coming in off the Atlantic, so it never gets that hot. Indeed, there'll be some heavy, thundery rain across northern parts of the country. Tomorrow's temperatures then even higher, probably reaching around about 33 degrees Celsius in the very hottest areas. How does that compare with recent Junes? Well, over the last 5 years, we have seen temperatures reach similar values, so it's not that uncommon these days. But this is partly, I suppose, related to climate change, because if we take a look at a graph, if we plotted all of the temperatures through the year here in the UK, we'd get this normal distribution. Sometimes it's cold, often it's average, and sometimes the weather gets hot. But with climate change, actually, it becomes more warmer, if you like, so average temperatures increase and the chance of seeing some extreme weather increases as well. That's how things are looking.
Chris, thank you very much. Claire, should we be worried about the increase in frequency of these types of events?
It was funny when I was watching that graph, because I was thinking, this is an unscientific answer. I was thinking, God, I spend most of my time wishing it was warm.
I know.
We now have 1 week of sunshine and we're having a kind of existential crisis discussion about whether it's global warming. There's health warnings going out. You do think, oh, let us enjoy the sunshine.
Well, absolutely. Am I being a killjoy?
I don't know. I know I'm being glib. I'm just pointing out that when you see that graph, it makes it sound as though we are suffering a bout of warm weather. I think we've had a week of warm weather. I don't know where that pink bit's gone, because I never noticed it. Of course, the climate changes. I've been on the programme before and pointed out, I think that we have to be careful that we don't always see everything through the precautionary lens, that we panic and everything becomes an emergency.
Right. Should we change the way we think about hot weather waves like the one we've been in?
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's not just about the hot weather. We have this tendency to think about climate breakdown as just this thing that's making it hot sometimes and a bit rainy other times. But I mean, part of the reason that we're in this massive cost of living crisis is because we've had consistently crop failures and difficulties all around the world in terms of harvesting food. We've had, you know, the energy crisis as well. We haven't moved swiftly enough to renewable energies, which means that we're dependent on terrible regimes like Russia, like Saudi Arabia. We aren't, you know, going towards renewable energy quickly enough.
We've only got a few minutes. I'm just going to read you this statistic, government website. Excess deaths across 2020 heat waves, over 2,500 people aged 65 plus. And that's why I don't want to be a killjoy and everyone loves the weather. But
I think we've got to look at, sure, it's a health risk and it has caused problems. And certainly my husband's from Spain and they've been experiencing, you know, 40 degrees and more. And it's really problematical. But I think we do have to see it in the context of the global situation and our response. Because actually, you know, there are communities that are suffering these heats where their crops fail, where they can't get food, where their land disappears because of the rising sea levels. It's these issues that we all need to take seriously. So I don't think we should be glib about it. I don't want to be a killjoy. Of course, we all enjoy warm weather. But when these extremes impact on people's food supplies and their land, we have to respond.
Coming from Aberdeen, I take issue with the suggestion that we all enjoy the hot weather.
Well, we did say parts of the country were having these
struggling today, but you know, we shouldn't be so Scrooge-like as to deny people the opportunity to enjoy the hot weather. Given everything that we're going through right now as a country and how people are being affected by them, we've already talked about cost of living. Of course, we should be pleased to see people out and enjoying the sun. That's not to say there aren't serious issues that we should also be dealing with as well. And seeing this in the context of a much bigger global problem. That's why the Conservative government legislated for net zero. That's why we're leading the way in terms of the G7 and reducing.
All right, we
our
don't need to
emissions.
do. We
I
don't
knew
need
that
to do
might
a
trigger
party
Claire.
political broadcast. But do we need to do things in terms of infrastructure if these things are becoming more frequent? You know, I mean, I hear it on the train. Take a bottle of water with you.
Yep.
Perhaps wear a hat. Maybe these are the sorts of things you would see.
100%.
All right. Well, with that, go and enjoy the
More air
sunshine. If you have got any sunshine, more air conditioning. It's quite cool in here, I think, actually. The studio enjoy. I've got to get rid of them in a few minutes. I'll be back with Politics UK tomorrow. Bye-bye.